honourable member for Fairfax.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak about the Future Made in Australia Guarantee of Origin Bill 2024, and I move the amendments circulated in my name. Deputy Speaker, the government will claim that these bills are non-controversial. In fact, as the Assistant Minister suggested in his second reading speech, it concludes 4 years of effort by the department, therefore building on the work of the former coalition government. In other words, the Albanese Labor government is seeking to tell the Australian people that these Guarantee of Origin bills are simply a building on of the previous coalition government's work in the exact same field. However, Deputy Speaker, what is before the House bears little to no resemblance whatsoever to that which the coalition government was pursuing in office when it comes to establishing a Guarantee of Origin scheme. Labor has done what Labor always does. It has very cleverly tried to play the politics, effectively stolen the labelling of a scheme, a Guarantee of Origin scheme, from the coalition, pretended it's built on that, but kept the basic tenets in place, yet it has in fact completely hijacked the substance of that scheme and made it into something entirely different. And those differences will unravel today. But before I get into the specifics of the bill, Deputy Speaker, let me at least address some of the issues raised by the Assistant Minister in his address to this chamber on these bills. The Assistant Minister spoke about the importance of introducing Labor's Guarantee of Origin scheme to continue the prosperous and sustainable evolution of Australian industry. Now, clearly the Assistant Minister wrote that speech in the bubble of this parliament, because out there in the real world, industry is struggling. Industry is on its knees, in large part because of the mismanagement of climate and energy policy in this country. Only today, yet another report came out, this one focusing on small businesses in Australia, where 63% of Australian small businesses have told CommBank in their survey that they cannot afford the energy transition being put by the Albanese Labor government. Over the last 2 years alone, we have seen a tripling of insolvencies. Manufacturing in particular is on its knees. Why? Because this government went to the Australian people promising a $275 reduction in power bills, only to lead to the highest electricity bills Australia has ever seen. Australian businesses, industry that the Assistant Minister thinks is prospering, industry is now paying among the highest electricity and gas prices in the world. The second point I want to point out from the Assistant Minister's speech is his suggestion that Labor's Future Made in Australia policy is all about leveraging Australia's comparative advantage. And indeed, anybody who studied economics would understand the importance of leveraging a nation's comparative advantage. And yet, the first announcement under this scheme was for solar panel manufacturing. The second announcement for quantum computing. Now, there is nothing wrong, to be clear, with solar panel manufacturing, and quantum computing is vitally important. But the point here is neither of those sectors represent a comparative advantage for our nation. This is the centrepiece of Labor's economic policy, meant to be leveraging Australia's comparative advantage. And the first two announcements they come out with actually are not things Australia has a comparative advantage in. The third point I want to point to in the Assistant Minister's speech is his suggestion that Australia has abundant clean energy resources. Now, on that point, he is right, except when you see how he interprets that in the context of these bills. And it's how Labor, moreover, interprets clean energy. The abundant resources to which the Assistant Minister refers, and other Labor ministers, is only that of sunshine and wind. What they fail to acknowledge is Australia also has abundant resources, including gas and including the very resource they refuse to even acknowledge, uranium. Uranium, which right now is powering nuclear energy power plants the world over, creating zero emissions electricity. We already are a clean energy superpower in this country, but Labor will deny that because they are only interested in a renewables-only approach. And you see, Deputy Speaker, this is the very problem we have with the bills that are before the House. Labor has taken what should be a bipartisan approach to establishing a guarantee of origin scheme specific to hydrogen, and they have applied their all eggs in one basket renewables-only dogma. And they have fundamentally changed the intent of this scheme. Now, the intent itself, can I say, I agree with, Deputy Speaker. The intent itself, at a very high level, is to establish a guarantee of origin scheme for hydrogen, one that allows the tracking and verification of emissions for that product, so that buyers and sellers in the marketplace can understand from where that product comes and its emissions profile. At that level, there's no problem with this scheme. But it's the detail where Labor has taken it, applying their renewables-only dogma, where it all goes wrong, Deputy Speaker. Firstly, unlike the Coalition's approach, Labor has decided not to be technology agnostic when it comes to establishing this guarantee of origin scheme. Instead, true to form, Labor has decided it knows best on the specific technology for Australia's future, and it can only be renewables with no consideration for any other technology. In contrast, the Coalition believes that renewables will play a vitally important role in Australia's future, but it is not the only technology for our future. It is but one, albeit a very important one at that. And so Labor's scheme is not technology agnostic. When the Coalition was looking at introducing the Guarantee of Origin scheme, and we had done the consultation, we had put out the basic terms of reference and scope for a trial, our view, and I quote here, if I may, Deputy Speaker, the Coalition scheme was to, and I quote, include projects across a range of production methods, including renewable electricity, biomethane and coal and gas with substantial carbon capture and storage. The bills before the House are silent on those methods other than renewables, Deputy Speaker. And herein lies the problem. Indeed, one of the mechanisms enabling the Guarantee of Origin scheme is the Renewable Energy Guarantee of Origin certificates. Again, confirming that this government's approach to the Guarantee of Origin scheme for hydrogen is solely focused on one colour of hydrogen, that being green hydrogen. That's their preference, that's what they're going after. And that is why we do not see true technology-agnostic approach coming through with these bills. The second point I'll make, Deputy Speaker, is that these bills are not just reinforcing Labor's dogma of renewables only, but within the family of renewable technology, it unfortunately biases wind and solar to the detriment of hydro. Wind and solar to the detriment of hydro, which is why you see Tasmania Hydro concerned that they will not be eligible to the same extent as companies that since 1997 have installed renewable projects. So, to make this clear about how perverse the implementation of such a thing would be, you would have Tasmania using zero-emissions hydro to produce hydrogen, but in order to go to market and receive the premium for such green hydrogen, they'll probably have to buy certificates from the mainland. So perverse does this bill suggest it would work in reality. Thirdly, Deputy Speaker, one of the key priorities when the Coalition was in government looking at a Guarantee of Origin scheme was to ensure the scheme would work in concert with other countries. Indeed, one of the findings, and I quote again from the consultation that we had done in office, was that, and I quote, "A local scheme must be internationally aligned and accepted by our trading partners." Again, it's notable, Deputy Speaker, that the Guarantee of Origin schemes being established by the EU and UK again express a far larger appreciation for different colours of hydrogen than does the Labor Party, including, for example, blue hydrogen with carbon capture and storage, that is the use of gas, with carbon capture and storage, something Labor has been silent about through this entire process. There's also the risk here that what Labor is doing is in fact introducing a Trojan horse that will see the expansion of what in practice will effectively be a carbon price across other sectors. And we know this is a risk because instead of containing the Guarantee of Origin scheme to hydrogen, the government has made it very clear that their intention is to expand the Guarantee of Origin scheme to other products across the Australian economy. And the government has not put parameters around which products would be included. Examples they've given, but they have not provided any parameters. And so there is a risk, Deputy Speaker, that this is in fact a Trojan horse to apply this far wider than what the government is suggested so far. Now, if Labor's schemes in climate change and energy were working fine, I think the coalition would be more willing to accept Labor's word on face value. But let's have a look at what they've done so far. This is the same government that walked into this chamber and legislated for a 43% emissions reduction by 2030. When this side of the House, the coalition, called on the government to at least get the likes of the Productivity Commission to do the economic modelling so they could tell us exactly how it could be achieved and who would pay, what the impact would be on the economy. This government refused to do that, but legislate they did the 43% emissions reduction target. After successive years of emissions reduction from Australia under the coalition, what has happened over the last 2 years since Labor has come to office? Emissions have gone up. Emissions have gone up. This is their track record. The same government that came to office promising a $275 reduction in household power bills still to this day have refused to come to this dispatch box and concede that that is a broken promise. Australians in some parts have seen electricity bills not go down by $275 but increase by up to $1,000 more than what Labor promised them. This is their track record. The same government that promised an electricity grid of 82% renewables by 2030. 82%. Now, in order to achieve 82%, they need nearly 7 gigawatts of new renewable generation installed every single year. 7. Up to 7 gigawatts. Last year, 1.3. 1.3. Buckley's chance. And so this is why we have yet another bill here today, Guarantee of Origin Bill. It speaks again to their dogma, all eggs in one basket, renewables only. And they want the Australian people just to take their word for it. My word is my bond, was the commitment of our now Prime Minister. Seriously? Every member of this parliament has an obligation to the people they serve. And I certainly have an obligation to my own constituency. And there has been no track record from this government that should be trusted when it comes to climate change and energy. Every single promise they have made, to date they have broken. Now, I accept that the Assistant Minister, who I have to say is a very decent man, I accept that he might believe, hand on heart, that Labor's doing the right thing. But their track record says otherwise. There are holes all through this bill. So what do you do in this situation from the coalition? You do the right thing by the parliament and the Australian people. You seek more scrutiny of the bill. Yesterday, Deputy Speaker, I stood at this very dispatch box. I put forward a motion to the House seeking more scrutiny into the bills we now debate, in the hope that the Standing Committee on Economics could take a review consistent with Standing Order 143 of this parliament, could take these bills away, a cross-parliamentary committee, do more scrutiny, answer some of the questions I've raised today. But the Labor Party voted against that motion. They were going to be party to that review. They refused consideration. What does that tell us about the confidence of the Albanese government that they are refusing scrutiny into these bills? of a guarantee of origin scheme when we have outlined concerns in good faith. They refuse to have that scrutiny. This House of Representatives, there are members of this chamber that wanted that scrutiny. They denied it. They denied it, and now they're going to cry crocodile tears. Well, why don't you just push this thing through? Because the track record of this government is one of failure, and there are too many holes in these bills. There are too many outstanding questions that have not been answered, and because this government has refused scrutiny put forward in a motion of this parliament, they all came into the chamber and they voted against scrutiny into this bill. Now, is this the first time, I ask, that the Albanese government has refused scrutiny into their future Made in Australia policy? No, it's not. In the last sitting of the parliament, we had the future Made in Australia bills before this House. There's a part of our procedures in this House referred to as consideration in detail, which allows members of this parliament to stand and to debate and ask questions of the relevant minister. When it came to the future Made in Australia bills in the last sitting of parliament, that session of consideration in detail was gagged. People were gagged. A guillotine came down. No. The Labor Party, the Albanese government, did not want scrutiny in the primary bills for their future Made in Australia policy. And now we have bills that form part of the future Made in Australia on the guarantee of origin scheme. We have had fair and reasonable concerns, and this government refuses to have the parliament and therefore the people of Australia scrutinise the bills. And now they want us all to come in, hold hands, sing Kumbaya and say, yes, Prime Minister, yes, Labor Party, your word is your bond, and we'll just take you as a matter on trust. So let me come to conclusion here, Deputy Speaker. When it comes to a guarantee of origin scheme focused on hydrogen so that we can have verification and tracking of emissions in that product to ensure that Australian companies can receive a premium where they have low emissions hydrogen produced, that we agree entirely. In fact, it was the coalition which started the entire process. But the Albanese government has done what it always does. It's played the politics, not the policy. As it has with even Made in Australia, generations of Australian men and women building that brand Made in Australia overseas, creating goodwill. The Albanese government comes in, it steals that brand, steals it for themselves, packages up what is nothing more than just a big government picking winners approach and calls it an industry policy. So too they've done with the guarantee of origin bills. They have taken a coalition policy, kept the label and fundamentally reformed the substance. And then they have the gall to expect the Australian Parliament and therefore the Australian people just to roll over, get tickled on the tummy, trust them. That's not the way it works. It's not the way it should work. And so I say to those members opposite that if you want to carry the Australian people on climate change and energy, it starts with transparency. If you want to carry this parliament, especially the coalition, it means just being open. It means working with us. It means not denying scrutiny into the bills. Unfortunately, that's not what's played out here, though, Deputy Speaker. Here we are dealing with a bill which is fundamentally different from the intent where it started. Thank you very much.